Tonight, Question Time comes from Devon on the English Riviera, and it feels a world away from the drama unfolding in Westminster. But what happens there affects everyone here, and they've plenty of questions about it. Welcome to Question Time from Torquay. On tonight's panel, Bim Afolami, Conservative Party Vice Chair for Youth until he resigned last week. He now supports Rishi Sunak to become the next Prime Minister. Chris Bryant, an MP for more than 20 years, a former Foreign Minister under Gordon Brown, now Chairman of the influential Parliamentary Standards and Privileges Committee. Minette Batters, President of the National Farmers Union for England and Wales, a farmer herself, and the first woman to be appointed to the post. Former English teacher and one-time President of the TUC, currently General Secretary of the biggest teaching union, the National Education Union, Mary Bousted, and journalist and assistant comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Olivia Utley. Good evening. Welcome to the panel. Welcome to our audience here in Torquay. Great to see you all. And, of course, welcome to you at home. Do join the conversation in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. Be part of the conversation. Let's hear what you've got to say. Right, our first question tonight is from Maureen McAllister.
Do you think a change of leadership will be enough to encourage more trust in our government?
Right, so we're down now to the last five. Chris?
No, I don't think so. Maureen, you'll be surprised to hear. I mean, I'm absolutely shocked that they kept this man in place for so long. What was it they didn't spot ages and ages ago? I mean, it wasn't just the lying to the Queen about suspending Parliament illegally, or the partying and then lying about it, or you know, trying to tear up the rule book to protect his friend Owen Paterson, who had been found to be lobbying other MPs on behalf of his paying clients who were giving him more than £100,000, or appointing a person he believed to be a sex pest to a senior important job in the Whip's office. I mean, what was it they didn't spot in all of that process? It took, and I say to Bim, who I have to say, immensely fond of.
This is the bit before he says something very critical.
I don't know why you stayed in post so long. You knew he was a wrong 'un. You knew what he was doing to politics in this country. You knew it, and yet you stayed. And I think, a bit like him, when he resigned, he didn't actually use the word resignation, did he? I think when you resigned on air, you didn't say resignation, did you? I think you said that somebody was going to sack you. Why on earth did all these people, and Rishi Sunak, and all the others, why did they defend him?
So the first thing I'd say is that the issue with the illegal parties at Downing Street, that was, I think, the principal issue in this year, 2022, that led to the particular erosion of trust with you, members of the public, and indeed within the party. The Prime Minister apologised for that, and we had a confidence motion. Now, in the run-up to that confidence motion, the Prime Minister, in discussion with people like me and many others, said words to the effect of, "I've apologised, I know things went wrong, give me a chance to rebuild trust in me, in the government, in the party."
He did also say, "I would do it again," in terms of, if you remember, when he was explaining why, for the event that he got a fixed penalty fine, he was thanking a member of staff, and he said, I thought it was my duty to thank people who were leaving for morale. I would do it again.
Well, I think the point he was making was wanting to thank people is something he didn't want to resile from. But my point was simply, he asked for that, a chance to rebuild that trust. We gave him that chance only at the beginning of January, I think the confidence motion was, beginning of June rather, though it seems like a bit longer ago now. And the reason why I resigned when I did was that with the issue with the former Deputy Chief Whip, I felt that was an example of some of the similar behaviours that we'd seen, and therefore I didn't feel that things were getting better, and I thought they were not improving, and therefore I felt that I should resign, and many, many other of my colleagues did so. It's important that we don't trivialise what has happened. We live in a democracy. We had a Prime Minister elected with an 80-seat majority only 2.5 years ago. It's a big thing for a party to remove or for a Prime Minister to be forced to step down mid-term like that. We shouldn't trivialise that.
But Bim...
And so, as a result, it was... I don't apologise for it being a very hard decision. I think the loyalty that we owed as Conservative MPs to the Prime Minister, and indeed staying together as a party, was important to deliver on the mandate that we were elected on.
But Bim...
But no, just let me finish.
Just briefly.
But when we felt that we couldn't do it, those of us like myself who felt that, then I thought it was right to resign, and many other people did as well. I think that's not a...
When the Owen Paterson report came forward, which showed that Owen Paterson on at least 14 occasions had lobbied government ministers in favour of companies who were paying him hundreds of thousands of pounds, you voted to tear up the rule book to protect him. How on earth can you come to the conclusion that that was the right thing to do? Was it just because you were standing by the whip? You're a decent person. How on earth was that the right thing to do? That's where all of this started. It didn't start in June of this year.
Okay, let Bim answer that.
Well, in relation to that particular point, we were trying to deal with some of the broader problems with the whole system that many people felt was unfair and didn't give people a right of redress in the way how that system worked in Parliament.
And the timing was just coincidental with Owen Paterson.
No, and obviously the mistake that we made was doing the same thing, trying to make those changes at the same time as the Owen Paterson issue came up. That was obviously a mistake, and I think it was within 24 hours the Parliamentary Party and the government had said, look, we've made a mistake. But the broader point here is really important.
And how did you vote in the vote no confidence motion?
Just to answer the lady's question, it's about how do we rebuild trust now?
Okay.
The answer is it's not necessarily a change in leader will do that. The new leader and the new government and the party will have to try and rebuild that trust with you, with many other people in the audience. And I hope that we can do that.
Let's go back to Maureen and ask her. So your question, do you think a change in leadership will be enough? Will it be enough for you?
I don't think so. I think it's about hearts and minds.
And are you saying that, can I ask, as a Conservative voter?
I'm just saying it as a person who's watched people just take the mickey out of us, really, the public. And I just feel that it's got to be more than just put a new person in and everything's going to be okay, because for me it's not. And I think that we've been through so much that...
So what would you like to see happen, Maureen?
I don't think I'm qualified to make those sorts of views, but I just think it's somebody that's actually... So many things have gone wrong. So many things have been put in place that were wrong, you know, for years. And I think it's actually taking a bit of responsibility. And you all got to have a confidence vote. We didn't, and it's our country. And I just think we need to have more respect for you, but I think you need to have more respect for us, because we're not...
I think when you get really, really bad behaviour over such a long period as we've had, then it does more than just tarnish the Conservative Party, which is utterly tarnished at the moment for the reasons that Chris has laid out. But it also has an effect on politics itself, because it's very easy then for everyone to say, well, they're all the same. And I think that's really dangerous, because politicians and politics has such an effect on our lives, on our taxes, on our public services, on really important decisions around our relationships with the rest of the world, our standing in the world. And when you have, as a Prime Minister, somebody who is a serial liar, who, and it wasn't that you just decided to tie up Owen Paterson with a wider reform. What happened was there was a meeting with Boris Johnson and Charles Moore and others, and they decided to get Owen Paterson off. So that's not right, and you can't, get out of it like that. But when you have such, dragging honesty and truth and probity through the mud, then the danger is people switch off from politics, and politics is serious. And whether we like it or not, politics affects our daily lives every day. So we have to have politicians who we can engage with, who we can trust, and who we can respect, and who we can challenge, knowing that when we challenge them, they are to the best of their ability telling us the truth. I am very, very slow to call someone a liar, because I think that's a big word, and that's an intentionally to deceive. You can get things wrong, you can make mistakes, you can forget. I think we've been led by somebody who lied and lied and lied again, and I think that's toxic to the body politic of this country.
All right, lots of hands up. Let's hear from Tom. Yes, a woman here in the white dress in front.
Moving on from that, how do we now trust the Conservative Party with the choice of the next leader? I mean, all I'm hearing is we're going to give you tax cuts. We need more than that in this country. We need a good statesman to bring this country back to, you know, looking after its people again.
OK. Man here in the front in the blue shirt.
Talking about turning people off from politics, one of the problems is it's so binary. It's like a Punch and Judy show, even with what the conversation that's happening now. Chris, you're saying they're liars, he's a liar, and that's it. That's all you're saying. And then there's just a defensive response. But actually, if you talk about this maturely, then, yeah, Boris Johnson's a liar, and I wouldn't defend that. But look at what he has done. And to remind ourselves, let's look at what Parliament was like before he took over, when we're going through the Brexit situation, and Parliament was just a laughingstock in a way, the way it could not handle the situation. Now, Boris has led us out of that. He's followed the will of the people in the country, got through that, got us Brexit, he's dealt with COVID, he's introduced a levelling. I live in Bideford in North Devon, and levelling up is extremely important for towns like Bideford. He's introduced that, and there's Ukraine, he's done well there. So, Chris, why don't you just say that, yes, he's a liar and he should be dealt with, but on the other side of that, he's done some things which are good, and then we can have a more mature conversation.
Okay, briefly, because I want to bring in more audience.
Because I don't think he's got the big calls right. Because I don't think he's got the big calls right either. Actually, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, I think Sweden and Singapore have all done a faster vaccination process than we have. Actually, Boris Johnson earlier this year was saying that inflation was not something to be worried about, and look what's happening in the country. Actually, the Prime Minister only last year said that we were not going to see tanks rolling across Europe again, and look what's happened in Ukraine. And for that matter, I am very critical of Boris Johnson, because ever since 2014 and the Conservative Party, they've refused to deal with dodgy Russian money in the British economy, and that has made us vulnerable, and it's emboldened Putin. So I don't think he's done well by Ukraine at all.
OK. Woman there in the blue top.
I want to pick up a point that you raised at the very beginning about being in the far southwest of England and feeling completely different to Westminster. And I also think there's something for me about that there's a feeling that we have been left behind. We were affected by Brexit, by not getting the grants to do with agriculture and farming. Fisheries was a big issue, and we've been promised things time and time again about a better transport link. God help us if it rains again, because we'll lose that link along the estuary. Better transport links, and actually we are part of England. We are part of a wider system. But getting back to the point about the leadership, I totally agree. I don't think a change of leader will necessarily, it's not enough.
So what, do you want to have a general election? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think I do, but the process is totally out of the public's control. We voted 2.5 years ago, and it was a democratic process. Because of the way our government runs, we are now in the situation where those decisions are going to be made for us by somebody else. And to the lady's point down here about the tax rises, and that's great, but actually it comes...
The tax cuts, actually.
Sorry, tax cuts. But actually that comes at a price. And our communities down here, we've got some of the most deprived wards in England. People are surprised by that. Torquay has got, I think it's the highest child protection rate outside of Liverpool. So it's not all green and lovely. It's not all beautiful. And actually, I suppose I'm asking that we need to have our say as well.
OK. And the man in front.
But honesty matters. And if a contender has publicly defended a lie, where does that put the contender?
Right, OK. In terms of the Tory leadership. Olivia.
Well, I'm going to say something quite positive here, actually. I think that Boris Johnson, I voted for Boris Johnson at the last election, and I think, as the man in the front row says here, he did get quite a lot of the big calls right, but I was ultimately very disappointed in him. He was clearly temperamentally unsuited to the job, and he wasn't willing to have honest conversations with people. He wanted to give whatever. He spoke to one person and they said, can you give some money to my constituency here? He said yes. Then he said tax cuts here. He just wanted to please everyone all the time, and that ultimately was his undoing. But I'm actually quite excited by this leadership race, and maybe I'm just naive, but I think you've got quite a lot of interesting young candidates pushing forward quite bold new ideas. And I think that, as you say, there are too many of them just offering tax cuts which are unfunded, and I would love tax cuts as much as the next person, but we do have to work out how we do that. But I think,
what about the man's point here in the front, that in terms of, because the question is about trust, and what you were saying, Sarah, was if these leadership contenders, and some of them certainly have defended Boris Johnson, then how can we trust them? I think that's what you were saying.
Well, I mean, it's difficult, but I think I agree with what Bim was saying there, that unseating an elected Prime Minister after 2.5 years is a big decision. And I hope what quite a lot of those MPs and ministers were doing was sitting there thinking, what's the right thing to do here? And they came to the decision, and maybe it took a little bit too long, and maybe they were worried about the democratic consequences, maybe they were worried about their own seats or whatever. But ultimately, democracy worked. We got the man out who clearly wasn't suited to the job. And we've now got a raft of new leadership contenders from diverse backgrounds, as I say, sort of young, interesting, offering something different for the country. And yes, it will take a while to restore faith in the Conservative Party, perhaps, but I think in some ways this is democracy working at its best.
Should Boris have gone earlier?
Yes, I think Boris should have gone earlier.
Did you write that?
The Telegraph was writing it constantly, yes.
OK. Let's let someone else on the panel come in. Chris, if that's all right. Minette.
I mean, I think the challenge is with some of what Olivia says is, you know, yes, lovely, bright young things that no one's heard of and no one knows, and suddenly running the country, that's quite frightening. You know, look, if we are going to restore trust, and let's hope to goodness, we don't have time. You know, my sector, not just my sector, farming, every single one of us eats, and so above all else, I want them to take food seriously, because it hasn't been taken seriously at all for the entire time of the previous government. We only saw this week an expose in Politico saying that actually Australia and New Zealand were going to harm British agriculture, not just British agriculture, but Scottish.
You mean the trade deals with them?
The trade deals with Australia and New Zealand. They were going to cause harm to farmers in the four nations. Time and time again, we said they are going to cause harm. They are going to undermine us. They're allowed to produce food to different standards, and that was ignored. And then the FOI goes in from Labour, and it comes out that, yes, it is going to cause harm. And time again, I was told, you can just be more positive. You must be more positive. I said, you know, we want a strategy and a policy. We know what road we're on then, and farmers need security. But it isn't just about farmers. I've witnessed the pig sector now 20% smaller than what it was. We have culled thousands and thousands of pigs because we didn't have a strategy for when we left the EU. We have got fruit and vegetables rotting in the fields. We have got a cost of living crisis, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but it's criminal to be wasting the food that we are and putting people out of business because we haven't got a strategy and a policy in place.
And in terms of the question, Minette, will a change of leadership be enough to encourage more trust?
I desperately hope so, because we're running out of time.
But do you think it will?
Well, that depends on, you know, the bright young things that Olivia refers to. I mean, it's a massive job right now. It's a massive... Well, there are some that were in the previous cabinet. There are many that are not. And the polling today was saying that some, you know, less than 10% knew who they were. So I think that's a huge issue, really. When this is such a rural area, farming absolutely underpins this part of the world. It's so important. People want to know. and fishing, farming and fishing. Can I just say one point about the Northern Ireland Protocol? Everyone keeps us saying Boris Johnson got Brexit done. No, he hasn't. The Northern Ireland Protocol hasn't even started yet.
Let's hear from the woman there in the yellow top. Yes.
I think it can be seen to be quite an exciting time, but I've got the same worries as yourself, because who are these people? And you know,
so when you say who are these people,
yeah,
how many of them had you heard of?
Two, I think. Two, yeah. But for me, the main thing they've got to do is they've got to show us that they can work together restoratively, relationally, and all get on together in their own party, as well as getting on with everybody else, because that's just what we have to do in life, in our own day-to-day life and in our jobs. And if you can't do that and get that right, you know, how are you going to get the rest of it right?
And is what you're seeing so far inspiring hope that that will happen?
A tiny bit.
OK. Man at the back.
We are talking about honesty amongst the leaders. Is Keir Starmer the honest man?
Yes, he is. He's a man of fundamental decency. And I'll tell you this, when Boris Johnson, who was the first Prime Minister ever to be given a criminal sanction in Parliament by the police for the partying in Downing Street, what did he do? He just tried to shrug it off. What did Keir Starmer do when everybody was saying that he needed to be investigated by the police? He said, if I'm fined, I will resign. That is a man of decency, integrity, and he would be a very fine Prime Minister.
Ordering 30 pizzas for his people in that beer gate, is that a honest man, is he?
I didn't understand the question, sorry.
Ordering the curry you're talking about?
Yeah.
The police have investigated and said there was no case to answer.
I mean, the police have done an investigation, and as Chris says, there is no case to answer. So I'm not sure we can take that much further. The woman there in the red dress.
I wanted to ask, I think the biggest concern is moving forward, because as tonight's showing, there's still a little bit of sniping going on between the two parties. And a lot of the people that are standing there for this candidate's, leadership, 3 weeks ago they were voting to keep Boris in. Then, we'll step away, we'll start a new sort of mandate, work out we're nothing to do with it, and I'm going to stand for Prime Minister. And perhaps because I stepped away a week ago, people in the public won't actually notice that I had anything to do with Boris. So that's a major concern. And I think bickering amongst your party, I think criticism by the Labour Party are fabulous at criticising, but they don't actually come up with any ideas. You're doing this wrong, just get it right. If you get in, how do we know that we are now not going to be bogged down for the next 6 months with an investigation into this one? And he said, and she said, and they were doing this, and more muckraking between the parties. We need to know that who is going into power is actually going to win back the trust of the British people, that they are going to start doing a job. And I think what they need to do is lots of little adjustments to the problems and the issues that this country has, and create a domino effect and get Great Britain back on track.
Okay. Let's hear from the man in the front, the black T-shirt.
We keep talking about trust, but I don't see any of the current leadership contenders asking for Johnson to go now, which means we're stuck with this zombie government. Nothing's getting done. In any other walk of life, I mean, he'd be gone. It wouldn't be, OK, you can stay on for another 2 months. I think that just kind of highlights why so many people feel divorced and separate from Westminster, because it just kind of seems really counterintuitive to how things work sometimes.
Well, sir, I can fully appreciate why you think that. The difficulty is you need there to be a Prime Minister. Typically, whenever, any time in the past, at any other juncture, when we've had a change of government in between general elections, the previous or existing Prime Minister continues to enable an orderly transition. I don't think that that's illegitimate. I think that's important. If the Prime Minister just walked off and just gone away on holiday or something, many people, or maybe even you, in this audience would be saying, why has he abdicated his responsibility? We need sensible government before a transition. I think that
would you be saying that?
Would you be saying,
hang on, Bim, would you be saying that out of interest?
No, and if no one stepped up, I'd be saying, well, why don't the Tories have a deep enough ranks for anyone to step up on a moment's notice?
Well, why isn't the Deputy Prime Minister standing up?
I'm no fan.
Well,
I'm no fan of
I mean, what's the
Dominic.
point of having a Deputy Prime Minister if he doesn't step up when the Prime Minister has clearly been found unfit to govern?
Look, it is, as I say, at every other time in our history when this has happened, the Prime Minister has stayed in place and allowed an orderly transition of power. I think that's very sensible. In fact, in most countries, even after general elections, they have a transition that lasts a long time. It's not unusual. But just to take on the broader point, because I think this is really, really important, what many of you have said, talking about the real issues that affect people in this country, the cost of food, the cost of heating your home, these are critical issues now and, dare I say it, are probably going to get worse later on in this year when it gets into winter. One of the main reasons why I'm supporting Rishi Sunak is I know he appreciates these issues, he understands them, he's got the experience to deal with them. And
That's not the only thing people are saying, but people are also saying, how can we trust people who were part of the previous...
But the point is, dealing with the actual issues, I know there's a lot of political bickering, and I appreciate that, but dealing with the actual issues and focusing on that and being ready on day one to come in, not as an apprenticeship, but being ready on day one is really important. And that's why lots of my colleagues are supporting Rishi Sunak, for that reason.
But normally, when you're disgraced as a Prime Minister or a President, you go immediately. You don't hang around for 2 months. And on top of that, the cost of living crisis is going to get considerably worse in September because that will be the next round of changes to the cap on energy fees, which is going to be something like £700 extra. We have had one big policy victory this year. We campaigned for a windfall tax. Unfortunately, the government haven't done it properly. They didn't backdate it. The energy companies have had massive profits, windfall profits. They should have been properly taxed, and all of the money going to people who really need the support at the moment, not just some of it, which is what the government have done.
There's a lot of hands up. I'm going to just take a couple more questions and then I'm going to move on. Yes, the woman in the black top with the glasses there.
This is to you, Bim, who just said that it's not tradition for a PM to leave the state it would be in. But since when has this Tory government given monkeys about tradition?
Right, OK, and I'll let you answer that bit. The woman in this spotty top, yeah.
So you're saying about how we shouldn't be trivialising the fact that, a Prime Minister is being pushed out of his seat, in the midst of his term, but isn't the Conservative Party the party that we've now had we will be having 4 leaders from in, 7 years? Is the Conservative Party making that trivial and making that appropriate for us to be dealing with?
In very quickly before I move on.
Look, it is clearly not ideal to change Prime Minister frequently, but ultimately, through elections, through the things we've been discussing, democracy takes its course, and you go through periods of time where maybe you change leaders more frequently than you would like. What I'd hope is that going forward now, focusing on the issues, again, that really matter to people in this room and people all over the country, we can rebuild your trust, we can rebuild that connection with the people and show you in a couple of years' time that we've actually done the right thing. If we aren't able to do that, then, you'll vote us out and put in Chris and Labour.
OK, I'm going to move on, but before I do, I just wanted to say that I just want to see if any of you would like to be in the audience for our next programme. It's not going to be for a while because we are taking a little break over the summer, but we will be back on the 15th of September. We'll be in Birmingham. So if you would like to be part of the programme then, who knows what will happen by then? Not very much, I suspect. Do apply to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there and come and be part of our audience September 15th in Birmingham. It would be great to see you. OK, let's take another question now from Jackie. Jackie Holt.
We are promised a high-wage, high-skill economy. Is this likely when employers are told to take heed when giving pay rises and public sector workers to expect a real terms pay cut?
Mary, I'm going to come to you because this is an issue for teachers and I know teachers are threatening to
sorry,
go on
I
strike,
didn't quite get the question. Is that high tax?
We were promised a high-wage, high-skill economy.
Yeah.
Is this like when employers are told to take heed when giving pay rises and public sector workers to expect a real terms pay cut?
Well, Boris Johnson and his government were elected on levelling up. We're not going back to austerity. We're going to get people paid properly and we're going to get the public services up and running and we're going to get the left behind parts of the country levelled up. One of the most worrying things about this Tory party election, apart from the electorate, is the fact that suddenly we're now being promised tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, and the only way you pay for tax cuts is decimating public services, which are already, they've gone through COVID, they've had 10 years of austerity. If you look at school funding will not reach 2010 levels in real terms until 2025. So how do we get a high-skilled economy when we starve education of funds? And, you know, I just look at the latest numbers today. The fact is we're running out of teachers. So I looked, at the moment we have for next year 40 physics teachers on courses. That's 2% of the target. We have 16 computer teachers next year. That's 1% of the target. We have 133 maths teachers. That's 7% of the target. We're going to start next year with half our teacher training places not filled. We have teachers leaving, 1 in 8 after 1 year, 1 in 4 after 2 years, 40% within 10 years. You will know, if you're parents or your grandparents, that your children or grandchildren will be taught by multiple teachers because they leave. Or in many schools now, in secondary schools, the secondary school curriculum is being narrowed because there aren't enough teachers to do it, because they're walking away. My members have seen 1/5 of their pay in real terms taken away from them in 10 years. And if they get 3%, which is what the government is offering, that's another 8% taken off their real terms pay, 18% decline. Now, you cannot do that to public services and expect them to function. And public services are the bedrock of a civilised society. You have to pay for them. They are, you know, if you're going to have good public services, you have to have sufficient taxes to pay for them, and we're starving our public services.
Olivia.
I think that one of the big problems with Boris Johnson, as we've discussed, is that he did promise too much without explaining in any way how he was going to get there. And I think something like
he promised specifically a high-wage, high-skill economy.
Exactly. He promised a high-wage, high-skill economy, and, you know, it looks like we're heading for a recession. The economy is in massive trouble. So just to send out promises like that, they sound like platitudes, and clearly the public doesn't really believe it. So I think what we need from the next Prime Minister is someone who's willing to have difficult conversations and to be honest and to say, yes, if we're going to have this, we're living in fantasy land if we're talking about a high-wage economy at the same time as cutting taxes all the time, but we're not going to cut public services at all. There's too many promises and not enough honesty.
That's what all the Tory party hopefuls are saying.
That's not actually.
That's what they're saying. I mean,
well, the only one who's not saying it is Rishi Sunak. Okay,
Badnoch's not saying that either. She's saying that she'll get to tax cuts when she can, but she's prepared to have a genuinely honest conversation about what needs to be done. And
so when it comes to the teachers that Mary's representing, do you think, I mean, because you're threatening to go on strike over this 3% pay offer, do you think they should get more?
In the case of teachers, I think that teachers should get a pay rise. I think that there's a very simple rule that you can apply here. I think if an industry, if there's clear problems with retainment and recruitment in an industry, then the pay for those workers should be raised. If, for example, on the train lines, it's very clear that almost every position on every train line, there are sort of 20 applicants per place. So if it's so awful to work on the train lines, then why is anyone doing it? In the case of teachers, I think there is actually a good cause for giving teachers a pay rise because it is very difficult to keep teachers in their jobs. But I don't think that militant strikes is the best way to go about it. Only about 1/3 of teachers are interested in going on strike. The vast majority of them, everyone who I've spoken to, is desperate to get back into the classroom and to teach the children who've missed 2 years of education because of lockdown. So, yes, I think that there are often very good cases for pay rises, but I think that we need to have a Prime Minister who is prepared to explain to people, be honest with people about the tough economic decisions they've got to make and not just throw out huge promises like, oh, we're going to cut taxes and immediately while also having a very high-wage economy. I think it's just a question of honesty.
The woman at the back with the red ribbon in her hair.
Hi, I'm a teacher working in further education in a secondary school, and I've seen lots of my colleagues, particularly since COVID, leave the profession.
And what's driving that?
So my personal view is that we just aren't having the resources to be able to support the needs of our learners. At least 50% of my learners are living through extreme poverty, so I'm using my own funds to provide breakfast for my learners, and I know my colleagues are. We're waiting forever for CAMS. We've got significant mental health issues going on which aren't being supported, and the impact that has on your own mental health as a professional it just can't be underestimated. If you're not able to deliver what you set out to do as a teacher, your role becomes obsolete. So I think it's not about us, not getting necessarily a pay rise. What we really want is to see our young people being looked after the way that they are always promised by government, and in fact it never actually happens on the classroom floor.
Okay. A man there in the red and black with his sunglasses, there you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm a university student graduating next week. Very exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But throughout my degree, a lot of it was, of course, at home, but towards the later stages, there were a lot of strikes, and they were really damaging to my education, some weeks before important final exams. And so 100% support pay rises for teachers, but strikes are so damaging to students, and it really does have an impact on how well we perform. And if we're going to create this high-skilled economy, impacting the students and people that are going to become these high-skilled workers is surely not the way to go about that.
Okay. Woman here in the red.
I actually work in a secondary school. I'm not a teacher, I'm a support staff, and I work with some absolutely amazing teachers who are so dedicated, and like this lady up here who said who are paying out of their own pocket to feed children so that they have breakfast in the morning.
Can you just explain to me how that works then, as you were saying? So what, they are just... They're buying the food?
They're buying toast, milk, so that children can come in and have a chat. Children who may not have a great start in the morning at home because they've got a big family, or so that they can come in before they go into a lesson and have some time with a teacher, have a chat, be calm before they actually go into the classroom. But you made a valid point about teachers leaving the profession. And the thing is, those teachers that are leaving the profession are leaving because they want to teach. But they are not just teaching, they are being social workers, they are being parents, they are making sure that those children are taking part in after-school clubs. And that's not right. The teachers want to teach their subjects well and be in the classroom with those teachers so that they have the best education, but they're not being recognised for that, and they're not being upskilled.
And Minette, I mean, Jackie's question, we're talking about teachers here, obviously reasons that you're here, Mary, but it doesn't just apply to teachers.
It doesn't at all. I mean, I remember when this comment, or soundbite, whatever you want to call it, was made at party conference last year, when the Prime Minister said, we're going to be a high-wage, high-skill economy. And it was sort of economically illiterate, because alongside that was the promise, of course, that everything was going to be cheaper. So we were going to have cheaper shoes, cheaper clothes, and cheaper food. And how was all of this going to work? So I think that is the biggest challenge, and what I hope the new Prime Minister will do is effectively open the door to business across all departments, actually, the public sector as well, and have the conversation, because actually engaging has been our greatest challenge. In my entire time, I never got into the Home Office. I was never able, despite the fact that the pigs were getting culled on the farms, the crops are still rotting in the fields, I never got into the Home Office. I mean, I know this is Kevin Foster's constituency. I never got him out on farm to see what was going on. I was pleading. I still am pleading, Bim, for it to be sorted. So I really, really hope that the new Prime Minister is going to open the door, engage and sort these things out, because they are piling up and up and up. And if we go back to more soundbite, illiterate economic lack of viability, it's going to be disastrous. It has to change.
So we were promised a high-wage, high-skill economy. Is this likely when employers are saying don't hand out pay rise and public sector workers are expecting to get a pay cut?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of this has been unfair, and let me explain why. In terms of high-skill, high-wage economy, the way how, in any country like this, we are going to improve the wealth and prosperity of our country is by skilling our people well in all the, we're talking about schools and further education colleges and university. That is core to what we're doing, and so that's why all the effort and policy needs to go into improving that. It is also true that once you improve skills, you can improve wages because, of course, your businesses you're setting up or where you're working, they are making more high-value products, they're doing better, and then they can sell them for more, and then that increases the wages they can pay people. So that is absolutely core to not just what this country needs to do, what every single country should be trying to do is aim for a high-skill, high-wage economy. And in relation to the idea that that is somehow not possible at the same time as not giving very high, though potentially, very desirable salary increases for teachers, for example, or other areas of the economy. The question is really not whether we want to increase teachers' salaries. I think they should be, but it's about the timing. And let me explain why.
We've had a 20% cut over 10 years. So explain to me when.
What we have right now is we have a problem of inflation, significantly rising prices that are above 10, 11%, and in some things they're significantly higher than that. Right now, the job of the government and the previous Chancellor, indeed, if he becomes Prime Minister, or indeed any other of the candidates who become Prime Minister, is to try and bear down on those rising prices so they don't keep going up over the medium and longer term. Once you get it under control...
Wages aren't driving inflation. Wages, 3% is not going to drive inflation at 11%. What's driving inflation is a war in Ukraine, putting up oil prices, gas prices and food prices. It's not public sector pay.
It's not a question of what drives inflation, it's what can contribute to it getting worse. Because what you have is a situation where you've got energy problems that are global, to do with oil and gas, partly made worse by Ukraine. You've got supply problems in Asia and China and various other things. So what we need to do for the time now is to make sure we get a lid on control rising prices. Once we do that, we can do the things that improve, we can get salaries up in all private and public sector and many other things. But it's really, really important that we don't all now say, right now, because of rising prices, all the wages in the economy need to go up by the same amount, because what that means is that those prices will continue to go up, and you need to go through a period of time where we bear down on those rising prices.
Chris?
I think sometimes politicians are massively out of touch with how people's ordinary lives are. And I think the thing that I read recently which shamed me more about the UK than anything else I've read is that we now have NHS hospitals that are running food banks for their staff because their staff aren't able to make ends meet on the salaries they receive. And I don't think any lectures about, this is going to make any difference to people. I also connect that with the fact that we've got an NHS backlog of 6.6 million people waiting for treatments. 6.6 million. And if you think it's all about COVID, it's not, because it was 4.8 million before COVID started. And at the moment, we're not training enough GPs to meet the number of GPs who are leaving this year.
But coming back to the question, Chris, it becomes a high-wage, high-skill economy. So you've got Mary here saying, in a very impassioned way, that teachers should get more than 3%. Yep. You've got Bim saying, if you go for 11%, it's going to fuel inflation. What would Labour do?
But my point is that all of these things are connected.
But what would Labour do, for example?
Well, for a start, I wouldn't waste £28 billion on a test and trace system that didn't work at all.
In respect of Mary,
no, government waste is a really important
I'm not saying it isn't, but Mary's here and saying that teachers should get a higher pay rise than 3%. Would Labour agree with that?
I think I'm not the Labour spokesperson,
no,
but I think
but
since I'm here, yes, I think they should, and I think we should do many more things to make sure that ordinary people who are in all those jobs that we clapped during COVID, hypocritically it now turns out, in many cases, all those people are able to put food on the table and pay the rent. I cannot tell you how many people I have in my constituency now who are terrified, literally terrified about paying the rent. And are going, and many of them are public sector workers.
But isn't the worry also that there are private sector workers who are in exactly the same situation? And I think sometimes people make the mistake of sort of imagining that everyone in the private sector is somehow rich, but there are all sorts of, cleaners working in offices, etc., who are in exactly the same situation. And won't they just be paying for an enormous rise in public sector wages out of their own salaries and become poorer? So unless there's a way to balance this, it's very easy for Labour in opposition to promise huge pay rises.
So a lot of people in those circumstances are people who are in work but on universal credit. Two things I'd change about universal credit immediately. I would reverse the cut of £20 a week, which the government took off everybody. And the second thing I would do, I don't know whether people know this, but for the first 5 weeks when you're on universal credit, you get nothing. You have to wait for 5 weeks. And what you can do is you can apply for a loan from the government. So the government puts you into debt from the very beginning, and then you never get back out of it. In communities like the area where I represent, and it's also true in a lot of parts of the southwest down here, working families, private sector or public sector, many of them are relying on food bank. I think that shames our country.
All right, I'm going to try and get one more question in from Mary Greener.
Do you think that legislation should be introduced to curb the number of second homes in Devon, Cornwall and other parts of the country, which is creating real problems for local people?
And what are your thoughts on this, Mary?
Well, I work in Cornwall in the health and social care sector, and I live in Devon. And what we see is three things, really. One is that communities are being completely decimated. There are communities in Cornwall where 70% of the homes are second homes, and they're usually empty. The second thing that's happening is that we're having dreadful problems recruiting staff in health and social care because they can't find anywhere affordable to live. And the third thing is that we're working with some very vulnerable people. And if you are trying to recover from a drug problem, mental health problem, it's really difficult if you haven't got a decent roof over your head. So I know it's a problem across the country, but I think in Cornwall in particular and in Devon, it's a real problem and it needs to be addressed.
Minette?
I think I'm right in saying, Mary, that there are 11,000 second homes alone just in Devon.
And that doesn't include holiday lets?
Exactly. So it's a massive, massive issue, and it looks like the loophole is going to be closed, but that is only going to happen in 2023. And affordable housing for people to stay in communities is now a massive and growing issue. And I haven't seen, Bim, it particularly featuring, again, back to the policy and the strategy of the road that we're on in the Levelling Up Bill, as to how this is going to be resolved. How are we going to have affordable housing in these areas? Because at the moment, second homes is continuing to rise and affordable housing is getting more and more difficult, and that is driving people out of communities, and that is creating an even greater challenge with workforce, fishing, farming, workforce being pushed out because it cannot afford to live in these places. Absolutely disastrous.
Olivia, should legislation be introduced?
Well, I think one very simple solution to this is to build more homes. The problem is that ordinary local people are being pushed out of their houses by second homeowners and are being priced out of the area altogether. My in-laws are in Cornwall, and you know, they see all the time that all of these second homeowners, as you say, it does decimate communities and it is a massive problem. But one big answer, which I still don't quite understand how there's so much regulation over planning, is to build more, and then there are more affordable homes naturally, and people can buy homes in their areas, and we don't have to build ugly homes, which is often the problem. This is why people, you know, talk about NIMBYs, which I don't think is a very nice way of putting it. Of course people don't want unattractive, brand new, horrible houses going up in their back gardens, but you can build nice homes and you can build more of them, and
they might want green space around their homes.
Yeah, but we've got, you know, a massive amount of brownfield land, which we've just got golf courses on, which could be used for new homes. It doesn't have to be building all over the green
But we do have a massive housing strategy, and we're building houses on Grade 1 and 2 land, which is simply ridiculous. We're putting solar farms up on Grade 2 land. So
the vast majority of the country still has no house on it. There are plenty of places where we could build without doing any harm to the environment in the area.
There's a lot of heads shaking in the audience, I've got to admit. The woman there with the blue top on, yes, you've had your hand up for a while.
Whilst second homes are obviously a real bad issue in the southwest, and I totally understand that, doesn't the planning regime need to be overhauled to stop the nonsense of development going on in the NIMBYism?
So there should be more development?
To allow more development and to shorten the length of time it takes to get planning for new houses.
OK, the woman here in the front in the flowery dress.
Well, in Paignton, in the town centre, they are trying to build houses. Every bit of land, they're going to take down a car park in Paignton to build social housing. And we've got empty properties in Paignton what are empty and not being used, it means that if they're building more houses, then they're going to bring more people into the area.
Which would be a good or a bad thing in your view?
Well, I think it'd be bad because we're about doctors and schools and hospital. Our hospital is overrun at the moment, as people know.
Woman there in the black top.
In Torquay High Street alone, you can walk along and there are so many empty residential units above shops. I don't necessarily think we need to build more homes that young people can't afford. Should we not be incentivising property owners to modernise and transform their current properties into residential lettings?
Mary?
I come from London, and you'd be amazed to know that we have the same. It's second home in a different way. What happens in London is that very rich people from abroad buy up. So there's a big development around Battersea, old Battersea Power Station. They've got people who are employed of a night going in, turning the lights on a computer program on and off, so that those look inhabited. Thousands of dwellings which have been bought purely as a business investment. So I think we have to do two things. We have to stop that by making it unaffordable to do that, to just buy and use it and never live there. And secondly, I think that what we have to absolutely do is what developers do when they're developing is the category for socially affordable housing. They say they're going to build so many socially affordable houses, they're not affordable, and then they find ways of not building them, and then they pay back to the council the money that, we need to stop that happening. We need proper, and finally, we need a Labour government to have housing as a major commitment and to allow local authorities to build council houses, which people can rent and live good, decent lives in council housing.
OK, Chris, I'll come to you in a minute. Bim, should legislation be introduced to curb the number of second homes in Devon, Cornwall? Because obviously this is where we are, in Devon, but in other parts of the country too.
No, I don't think we should introduce legislation for that. I think that your local councils should be allowed to take more action in areas where it's a big problem, as it is here. I think there are a couple of things we can do. The first is we could increase the taxes on people having second homes to sort of reduce the incentive for people to do that and put that money directly into building more affordable housing or social housing in the local area. Secondly, I think this is a broader point. I think that I'm very worried about the prospects for the next generation in terms of home ownership, in terms of getting on in life. If you compare home ownership levels of younger people, say under 35, now compared to, say, 30 years ago, they're significantly down on where they used to be. I think that is a real social problem that will grow over time. I think we need much more focus, not just in the Conservative Party, but across the political spectrum on that issue. And just the last thing I'd say is around local communities. I support what Olivia said in terms of building more homes and building attractive homes and building homes that are environmentally friendly and have the insulation, have that sort of modern materials that can last for the long term, because going back to the conversation about sort of excessive heat, we need to make sure that our homes are fit for purpose.
Chris, now, obviously you were set a challenge there by Mary.
Mary said she wanted a Labour government.
Well, there was a bit more to it than just that.
Well, and Bim said, I'm going to be the Prime Minister.
There was a challenge from Mary. And also, obviously, you're an MP for Rhondda, and that Wales is taking action over second.
Wales is already taking action in precisely this way. I'd say one thing before that, though, which is that I think too many decisions are made in London and the South East, affecting the whole of the rest of the country. And we need far more devolution across the whole of the country so that more decisions are made closer to the people that they most affect. We have regional disparities, of course, on postcode lotteries in terms of healthcare provision and also in terms of housing. I completely agree that I'm going to be very straight about this, which is, I think, a failure of the Labour government in the past was that we didn't build enough council housing. And actually, I always supported the idea of people being able to buy their own council house, as long as the money then went into building more council houses for other people, because otherwise you're basically pulling up the ladder once you've climbed up. And so we just need to build more affordable houses. It needs to be genuinely affordable.
But what about
the
question, should there be legislation to curb the number of second homes?
Yes, I would say say that there needs to be legislation, but it needs to do it in a way that allows local authorities to make specific decisions. So, for instance, one of the issues in the Rhondda, we have, I think it's something like 72% home ownership, because they were all former minor cottages. They're not, the average cost of a house is something like £100,000, so less than the cost of a tree house at Chequers. But what I want to see is each different area being able to make their own decisions. In the Rhondda, we haven't got this issue, but in the Brecon Beacons, which is just next door, they do. In Amsterdam, they've just decided that any new buildings cannot be rented out for the first 4 years after they've built. You've got to live in them. Yeah. And that has dramatically changed what's happening to the housing stock in the area. And that's what you want. And you don't want estates which are all the rich people at one end of town and all the other people at other ends. You want a mixed economy across the whole area.
OK. Mary, you asked this question, and almost as soon as you asked it and heard the first answer, you put your hand up again. So what would you like to say?
I do think it needs to be looked at on a sector basis, so different areas will have different needs. So the issue about building more houses, that's all very well, but again, if you go back to Cornwall, rents at the moment are about 50% more than the rest of the country, average rent. Average house prices are about 30% more, wages are about 25% less. So in parts of Cornwall, there is a lot of new build going on, but local people can't afford them. So new families are moving in, which is putting pressure on creaking infrastructure. So I think it needs to be looked at in different regions.
Woman here in the white jacket.
I don't think it's completely clear-cut. Devon and Cornwall rely really heavily on tourism and the employment that brings, so alienating the whole, can't buy a house here, I don't think that's the issue. I think the lack of affordable social housing being built and the awful idea of bringing back the right to buy, they're more of the problem than letting second homeowners move in locally.
OK. And then there in the blue top.
The only way you're going to solve this is if the state provides housing at an affordable rent for people, because rents go through the roof. People who own property that they rent out can make a lot more doing Airbnb or just a few weeks in the summer rather than renting their properties for the whole year. So the state is going to have to step in and pay some money and provide some accommodation. It's the only way.
What, cap rents, effectively?
Well, capping rents would be an interesting idea. We have done that in the past in terms of rent control. Nobody's advocating that, but I think it would be a reasonable idea.
Woman here in the blue top.
I feel very uncomfortable about saying we need more houses built in Devon. I too work in health and social care, and we've seen over the last few years developments popping up everywhere, and all we've seen is an influx of people from the southeast and other parts of England. At the same time, we've seen cuts in our schools, we've seen cuts in hospitals and the public sector. One of the big issues for me is about not necessarily second homeowners. That is part of it, but it's the people who historically have rented out long term to local residents, often working in low-paid industries and sectors like domiciliary care, home care. I think we're the second oldest county in England.
And what's the problem with that, are you saying?
They can't afford the rent. They're being evicted. They're being told, actually, I don't want to rent to you anymore. I'd rather earn enough money in 6 weeks from Airbnb that I can get in a year. And it's causing an absolute... It's causing a tsunami coming. There are also those people, as Chris said, and I can't believe I'm agreeing with you, the people, people
You've only got about 3 seconds left to do it, so you'll have to be quick.
People using food banks as a necessity, as well as being homeless. So it's a real problem,
Our time is up, I'm afraid. We could also talk about this for some time to come, but that's it. That is it from here in Torquay. That's also it from Question Time until September. We are off for a summer break. So, thank you very much to the panel for coming along. Thank you very much to all of you for coming here and spending your evening with us. It's a glorious sunny evening outside, but you've chosen to be here. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you to you at home for watching from Question Time until September. Bye-bye.